Hey everyone, I'm Jack, and in today's video I'll be ranking the bosses of CyberConnect 2 and Capcom's Asura's Wrath from worst to best. What makes a game special to me is its ability to convey an emotional and exciting narrative through a mixture of intelligently designed gameplay, cutscenes, and bosses. Leading me to say, Asura's Wrath is right up there as one of my favorite games ever, while in a generalized sense the boss fights, which make up the vast majority of the interactive gameplay, are formulaic in structure and functional approach. Each were different in attack variety and utilize the many different forms Asura takes on throughout the game. The beautiful story of love and revenge was presented as a 6-hour film made of 18, well, really 19, but actually 25.5 episodes, each a mix of cinematic events, combat arenas, and large-scale boss fights. Asura's Wrath has easily some of the best characterization of any game I've ever played, and as a fan of the cinema of attractions, the game's consistent use of epic battles, duels, explosions, and boobs kept me completely glued to it the entire way through. Lastly, while we usually do slides or transitions between each segment due to the lack of working pictures both online and in my footage for the majority of the fights in this game, I'm going to simply transition by saying the boss's number and name and then starting my script. Back to Asura's Wrath, with its unique art style, incredibly fast-paced narrative and gameplay, and character lore inspiration taken directly from Hindu mythology, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had playing a game. How do its bosses fare? Let's find out. Number 22, Evil Ryu, Hatred Incarnate. Over the course of my life, I've had a great many bad experiences. Just recently, for example, I got over a serious gastrointestinal infection after just beating bronchitis, strep throat, and the flu at the same time, and now I have an indigestion problem that's likely serious, albeit I'll be fine in time. Either way, sounds pretty miserable, right? Well, by comparison, I'd take another week of a pathogen melting pot than fight Evil Ryu, Hatred Incarnate ever a fucking again. You know, fuck Ryu being the Hatred Incarnate. I became the Hatred Incarnate, spending a literal hour of my fucking life fighting this godforsaken creature. To calm down a bit, let's just say that Evil Ryu is the ultimate form of self-imposed punishment. I know admittedly little to nothing about Street Fighter lore, but from what I understand, Ryu became Evil Ryu at the very end of the first World Warrior tournament in Street Fighter 2, giving into Satsui no Hado to its fullest extent, known as Evil Intent, and becoming a rage-induced Lord of Hate. You know the age-old question, if you could travel back in time to one point, where would you go? Well, for me, it'd be probably the storyboard where they came up with that fucking bullshit. Well, either way, even though I absolutely despise fighting this boss, there's a definite strategy to beating it that works 100% of the time, but in a quantum physics sort of way, also doesn't. Let me explain. Evil Ryu only has a small range of moves, each with an exact counter that if timed correctly leaves him open to damage. His most preferable attack is his mid-range Hadouken. Every time he does this, you can either roll right or left, then air launch him followed by a heavy attack QTE. When he does his close range lunge, you roll left, then air launch, his long range slash, you roll right, then heavy, the list goes on and on. My point is that every single attack has an exact counter that, if timed correctly, works. Sometimes, however, he will randomly change his stance angle due to the uneven ground, which sets you in a chain lock of attacks. Albeit this is a rare occurrence, but it completely shifts the fight's momentum and will likely fuck you in the ass. This all becomes meaningless, however, with Phase 2, when Ryu unlocks Raging Demon, an undodgeable cinematic attack that deals around a third of your health. And as if that wasn't enough, it ends with a Guitar Hero sort of button mash super combo with a timing window so absurdly tight, requiring the clicking speed of basically a fucking demigod, that I failed over and over, ultimately 10 times in one sitting. It's stupid bullshit like this that can ruin an entire game for me, but luckily the lost episodes are extra DLC that only ran me $1 to get. But even as unrequired post-game content goes, the demonic version of Evil Ryu is probably the worst of its kind, and as purely a boss fight, he's up there with some real shit stains as maybe my least favorite ever. Number 21, Wizen, Episode 2. Episode 2's Wizen fight is not much of one at all. It does a decent job setting in motion Deus's plans to create a new world by stealing Mithra, but the odd camera angle, small static arena, and repetitive Mario-esque rebound mechanic makes it a bang average boss, if you can even call it that. Number 20, Goma Squasher. There are a great many Goma creatures in this game, but I'll only be counting two as mini-bosses, the Squasher and Crusher. Both of them are alright, but Squashers are lower due to their undodgeable spin attack and how long their fights drag out for. For me, the most anger-inducing mini-boss in the game. Number 19, Goma Crusher. As I've matured, I've grown to appreciate the fixed camera in games a bit more. I still prefer the interactive lens, but static frames feel much more cinematic. This is a major plus to Goma Crushers. I did so horribly against the first Crusher in episode 7 that I decided on restarting altogether. The fight is so easy that if it starts to attack on damage, it's somewhat embarrassing, plus it's one of the easier episodes to S-rank to unlock true episode 18. While the Crusher has a wide variety of attacks, what you're really looking for is openings to heavy attack its feet. Aside from that, the ending cinematic was surprisingly awesome. Number 18, Goma Vlitra. Counting the Goma Vlitra is admittedly a bit of a stretch. Logically, every other flying sequence should be here too. With the video requests we get sometimes though, why not? I'll say it once so as to not be a broken record, but every single fight in this game kicks ass, this and everyone before it included. Asura is one of the most enjoyable to play characters ever, and flying through space to defeat an Earth-sized penis was just awesome, simply put. Number 17, Taison Niudo. Taison Niudo, like Goma Squashers and Crushers, are mini-bosses that eventually become common dregs by the endgame. For the sake of simplicity, I'll only be counting the initial Taison Niudo who appears on Kaoro's flagship in episode 9, which was quite the spectacle for a nothing boss. Episode 9 was one of the game's weaker missions due to its repetitive nature, but Taison Niudo was a necessary blip in said design, an enjoyable mini-boss, but nothing more. Number 16, Rasho and Taison. The Shinkoku army's non-Goomba enemies make their first appearance during Asura's reawakening. Rasho are way more difficult than any guerrilla or private you fought up to early episode 4, and it's a bit of a system shock having to go up against an actually sentient enemy. Countering and saving heavy attacks for Rasho makes light work of them, leading to the sumo. Taison are a lot easier than their brothers in appearance because their entire moveset is scripted in heavy attack QTEs. Trying to attack them when not prompted isn't exactly a bright idea, but so long as you're half awake, these two should be no challenge at all. Number 15, Eternal Challenger Ryu. The calm before the storm. Ryu is actually a really fun fight that I thoroughly enjoyed. I never play fighting games, and actually the last time I had played a fighting game was Mortal Kombat 2 at church with Alex. Talk about impurity. Anyways, it's Street Fighter, but much slower. Asura isn't nearly as agile in 2D as he is in 3D, but it's still a good time nailing down how to beat Ryu. Jumping over Hadoken is always satisfying. Ryu is just a lowly ninja, and sending him to the moon is so ridiculously funny. What followed was not. Number 14, Akuma, Master of the Fist. Luckily, Lost Episode 2 is accessible even if you don't beat Evil Ryu. Akuma had probably the most anime-esque introduction of any boss in the game, with the demon entering Super Saiyan God and then sending Ryu in a wormhole. Poor dude. The reason I put Akuma a spot higher than Ryu is because it's fought on the moon and he's a bit more difficult, plus his character design was nailed. Number 13, August Episode 3. At last we return to the common boss format. From this point on, all the bosses have generally the same concept, that being that whether as Asura or Yasha, your goal is to fill up your burst gouge through QTEs, combo strings, and prompted counters to eventually finish off your opponent. So, why is August the bottom of the core bosses? Well, it's a basic tutorial. He's able to deal enough damage to where tensions are raised very slightly, but any basic combo sends him flying back. August's first encounter pales in comparison to his second, with the true highlight of this being listening to Joseph Joestar in another man's body. Number 12, Wizen Episode 4. Episode 4 is the following mission to the August fight we just went over, and as such, Wizen is just barely a step above his fellow deity. This is also more of a tease for Vajra Wizen than an entirely fleshed out, unique boss. This hefty demigod swings at about the pace of Demon Soul's Vanguard and hits with the punch of a teddy bear. A positive I'll give him is that he does have the Soul's trademarked butt slam, but either way, this is a pushover in the purest sense of the word. Number 11, Yasha Episode 6. To finish off our triplet of initial 7 deity encounters, Yasha's first fight from episode 6 finds itself at number 11. Aside from Yasha being this game's Juba, this fight is inherently unique in that Asura has no arms throughout the whole thing. The animations look hilarious, and even if this was hypothetically miserable, it would at least be somewhat entertaining. It's like being a playable cucumber. This is the most emotionally driven and hardest boss of any to appear so far. Well, I was definitely emotionally driven for another boss, but you get the point. Yasha's teleportation makes him very difficult to read, so heavy aggression is key. Beating the first phase is essentially beating the fight, as you automatically start the second with about a fifth of your burst meter filled. As the conclusion to part 1, Yasha was greatly enjoyable and impactful considering how early on in the story he is. Number 10, Oni, Destroyer of Heaven. After Akuma enters Super Saiyan Blue, Oni, Destroyer of Heaven, emerges from his ashes. This is my favorite name of any boss in Asura's Wrath, and his fight is pretty damn good too. The only major gripe I have with it is its 80s arcade theme. It's lame as hell. Anyways, where Evil Ryu fails, Oni succeeds in just about every department. While still very difficult, all of his attacks feel much more fair and they're all visually superior. Asura and Oni's set-in-stone rivalry is well deserving of its top 10 billing, closing off the lost episodes in style. Number 9, Chakravartin. How about it? A final boss not at the top. If we did a survey on 10 of our videos, at least 10 of them would have the final boss either second or first place. Of course, this isn't the final boss, the creator was a DLC add-on, but of the main game, this is the final task to complete, a secret 19th episode you only unlock through 5 S ranks. In this true episode 18, it's revealed that the golden spider, who's been subtly existing alongside you, is Chakravartin, the creator of the universe and true mastermind behind the demigod's plot. Your overall aim during this fight is to get as close as possible to Chakravartin and hit him before he sends you back to the edge of the arena with shockwaves. Since he's a static set piece, his moveset is designed around making getting to him a challenge. While it sounds and plays decently fun, the problem Chakravartin faces is that it is intensely formulaic and by trade repetitive. Even the second phase feels repetitious at best. The addition of laser grids and projectile enemies adds a bit of seasoning, but ultimately just forces you to stay back for a couple seconds longer than you would have in the first phase. Defeating the creator of the universe was indeed a satisfying way to conclude the story, however, the fight's dull, formulaic approach makes it average overall. Number 8, Gongen Wizen. In between Asura's first death and reawakening, the 8 Guardian Generals became the 7 deities, with each growing immensely in power. While the Goma Vlitra was a spectacle, Gongen Wizen is the spectacle. This is the first of a few high-octane, planetary-scaled events in this game, and probably the most memorable boss of any due to how early on it takes place. But even before Gongen form, Wizen first enters his measly Vajra state. At this point, he still doesn't see Asura as a true threat. With a target this big, the fight's bound to be different than others, and it is, but it's essentially just the flying combat on land. Your goal is to get as many hits as possible during each portion of the fight, sort of like G5 from Resident Evil 2, but a lot better, up until you load your burst gouge. After barely powering through Vajra Wizen, Asura resurrects himself from the edge of death in his 6-armed Vajra form, and Wizen ignites his Kurikara Fudo Uchi, followed by Asura delivering a killer blow in response, or to get a bit more complex, he literally rips a hole through Wizen's body and sends him into the cold vacuum of space. This pits Wizen to change into Gongen form, a planet-sized state of being that in terms of gameplay is more for show than functionality, but still delivers one of the game's best moments. Cinematic and important to Asura's character growth, Gongen Wizen is easily deserving of this high ranking. Number 7, Wrath Asura. By this point in the game, Asura becomes so engulfed in his rage that he evolves beyond demigod form into that of an inhuman monster, made entirely of materialized wrath. Playing as Asura in his wrath form was the best power fantasy moment in a video game I'd experienced up to that point. But beating him takes it to a whole new level. In this fight you play as Yasha, Asura's brother-in-law and my personal favorite character in the game. The pre-fight cutscene was one of the game's best and showed how dark and distorted the 7 deities worldview had gotten, but I fucked up the QTE. Fuck. Yasha's dodge is a physical teleportation, meaning you have a few more iframes than you would as Asura, and this makes evading Wrathform Asura at least a bit easier. Unsurprisingly, the beast is hyper aggressive, and when he lands a hit the damage is massive, but building up your burst gouge shouldn't take much time at all if you're moving only a decent amount. After a classic standoff Clint Eastwood style, you begin the second phase. Nothing's changed much besides all the momentum being on your side. You start with about 60% of your meter already full, and while Asura is much faster and has a fresh moveset, if you do more of the same from phase 1, it should be over pronto. As the game's narrative turning point, marking Yasha leaving the 7 deities to join Asura, Wrathform Asura delivers exceptionally well. Number 6. Deus. I was very surprised to fight Deus this early. Well, it is the third to last episode, but still, fighting the main antagonist before the ending is always a curious narrative decision. It's clear that even 2 of the 8 Guardian Generals are little challenge for the head demigod. His moveset is very nonchalant, and the fight feels more like Deus is testing the waters than fully engaging himself. Having Yasha is extremely helpful as Deus focuses on both you and him, but still it feels too repetitive and weirdly designed to be higher on this list, namely the QTEs where you're supposed to get him in a counter but he spawns too far away so he gets up with no harm done. Of course, this is just the beginning of Yasha and Asura's long-winded duel with Deus, but it's fun nonetheless and feels like an early dawn to the endgame. Number 5. Vlitra Core. The Vlitra Core is the boss I feel the least comfortable fighting, even after going through it 5 to 6 times to unlock episode 19 and then fighting him again to progress as well. After killing Deus, there's no one left to stand in your way except the questionably sentient creator of Goma, and unlike most bosses, the key here is keeping your distance. His arsenal consists of extremely wide, bed of chaos-like AoEs, short slap attacks, and dives, all of which are difficult to avoid and sometimes impossible to unless you're a good distance away from him. What you really want is the QTEs. Any form of damage that keeps you out of its direct range is ideal. While not the most mechanically inventive duel in the game, the Vlitra Core is possibly the most satisfying to beat, laying to rest your eternal enemy once and for all. Number 4. Sakura Devanam Indra Deus. It speaks volumes that Deus' Vajra form is considered the ultimate power state among all existing beings. So, unsurprisingly, when talking about difficulty, this is the cream of the crop. Vajra Deus plays like Gehrman blended with Aldea, unparalleled speed and ridiculous AoEs in one terrifyingly difficult boss fight. His defense is near impeccable and he can counter you immediately with arena-wide AoEs that also dish out large chunks of damage. And this is only phase 1, where you play as Asura and fight alongside Yasha. Phase 2 begins with Asura being sent out of the atmosphere with a light tap of Deus' nunchucks, and so it becomes a 1v1 as Yasha. The difficulty is ramped up in phase 2 as Deus fully engages himself in the encounter and only has you to focus on. With phase 2, he gains a whip that prevents close-ranged attacks, and anytime you jump in the air, he uses one of his many different AoEs to counter. He also immediately teleports after every attack, meaning the only openings you have are simply luck-based, otherwise you're on the defensive the entire time. Phase 3 begins with Yasha and Asura combining forces to stop Deus' charged super move, followed by my favorite QTE in the game. This last phase is everything I've said, but pumped to the max. It's ridiculously challenging but rewarding upon victory. Even with it being close to 30 minutes long, Vajra Deus manages to be engaging the entire time. Number 3. August, Episode 11. Asura's old master sure knows how to stave off his rage. Out of all the bosses, Episode 11 August was the only one where it felt like neither side had motivation to fight, rather this happened out of mutual respect, if anything. August's main strength is his speed. When you're able to get him down on the ground, he stays there forever, but otherwise he's damn near untouchable, and his heavy attacks even slow down your in-game perception of time. The choice of using classical music as a backdrop was genius in my opinion. Beyond fitting with the atmosphere of fighting on the moon, it adds a level of comedy but also elegance that meshes with August's laid-back demeanor. With the second phase, August unleashes his sword. This creates an entirely new moveset from the top down. As well, attacking August is literally impossible unless prompted. While I'm trying to, and have actually done a pretty damn good job at restraining myself from mentioning finishers so as to not be redundant, this was maybe the best in the game. August's sword extends from the edge of the moon to the Earth's core, stabbing Asura directly in his torso. That is, until Asura snaps his sword and kills him armless, with a fitting conclusion to follow. A fight of this quality narratively and gameplay-wise is only worthy of a character like August. Number 2, Yasha Episode 21. To those who've played the DLC, this top 2 should be no surprise. While the most emotional boss in the game, Yasha gets beaten out by Chakravartin in pure enjoyment value as well as his lack of phase-to-phase variety. When Asura resurrects, Chakravartin has absolute control over the earth and Yasha beckons you to fight in a test to decide who's stronger and in turn worthier to face the creator of the universe. In the first phase, you actually want to be as passive as possible as Yasha will counter every attack you throw his way. The easiest form of damage is rolling left during any of his basic combos and following with a charged air launch and heavy QTE. This turns the first phase from a challenge to a sleepwalk, leading into the second, an aerial duel. While maybe the shortest phase of any boss fight in the game, it's a fun, albeit messy fusion of the flight and land combat together. It's hard to have total locomotive control over Asura at any given point, but landing clean combos was really fun. This portion of the fight is set before the events of Asura's Wrath, and the in-between cutscene was probably the best of any video game ever, with great dialogue, brilliant shots, and even though it's actually a pointless conversation to the lore, gives both characters further depth and humanization. If it wasn't obvious before, this cutscene makes it pretty clear that Yasha isn't out to kill Asura, rather he's serving himself as a test, measuring Asura's will and ability to control his rage. Anyways, Phase 3 begins, essentially the first but souped up in speed and intensity. Yasha enters his Vajra state in this last phase, and like the first, the only way you can get in damage is to hit him during downtimes between his combos. While not difficult once you understand how to beat him, Yasha shines in his emotional weight. The flashback sequence leading into Yasha's sacrifice was one of the single greatest moments from any game I've ever played, but even with all of that going for him, Yasha is simply less fun and polished than Chakravartin the creator, leaving him just one spot short of being number 1. Number 1, Chakravartin, the creator. While Chakravartin's final form lacks the emotional weight Yasha had, without question this was the best boss from a purely enjoyment standpoint. And if not obvious, I value enjoyment over emotion when it comes to boss fights. Either way, the fact that Chakravartin is as fun as it is a monumental feat, in that by a time comparison, this puts Deus's finale to shame. Mind you, Deus takes incredibly long to beat, around 28 to 30 minutes, however, Chakravartin takes a grand total of about 45 at a minimum. Following Yasha's death, the emotional stakes are the highest they've ever been, and it's Asura in his purest form versus the creator of all matter. If Gongen Wisen had scale, I don't even know what to say about this. The creator is the epitome of a spectacle fight, beginning with flying through solar systems en route to his core. He throws entire planets at you to prevent you from reaching him at the beginning, continuing on with a Jupiter-sized planet QTE, and then suns, projectiles, and lasers. Eventually, and likely with a lot of damage taken, you'll crack Chakravartin's outer shell and enter his core. This phase is generally the same as Chakravartin from earlier, but amped in intensity and a bit more engaging than the original due to it being much shorter. And just when you think you've done it, Chakravartin's true dark matter form takes shape. This was visually the best boss in the game without question for me. I love the character design of his creator form, and the fight that follows was easily the most varied mechanically. He's reminiscent of a Mario and Luigi boss if they were in 3D, if that makes sense. He has tons of time warping attacks, matter ignoring swipes, and his entire moveset is unique to him. It speaks volumes of a boss fight if it's able to sustain player engagement for close to 10 minutes, nonetheless an hour. Chakravartin the creator not only manages to do so, but gets increasingly exciting with each passing phase, making him not just the best boss in Asura's Wrath, but one of the better among all in gaming. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and stay tuned for new videos every Wednesday. That's all for now. Deuces.